Okay, moving on to the last two factors, weakness of the League of Nations, which is something that again is not uncommon. So when we look at chapter 4, right, weakness of the League of Nations, they use the example of the Abyssinian crisis and how League of Nations didn't do anything in it and how that disarmament failed as well. Okay, so for this one, we're looking at two things. The Mukden incident, invasion of Manchuria, as well as the second Sino-Japanese war. If you can try to recall right now, when is the first Sino-Japanese war? That's in 1894-5, alright? Okay, so let's move on to the Mukden incident, invasion of Manchuria. There's going to be a lot of M's here, okay? In the invasion of China, the second invasion of China, there's going to be another M down there. Okay, so in Manchuria, how it happened was this thing through the Mukden incident. Okay, but why was Manchuria important was because they needed to defend Korea strategically, and at the same time it also provided a place for raw materials and markets for Japan, and also living space basically. Okay, so how did they do it was in 1931. Okay, this is way before anything. This is way before even Hitler rose to power. This is way before the two of them became allies. Okay, Germany and Japan. So on 18 September 1931, the Mukden incident, there was a bomb that was exploded, and the Japanese army blamed the Chinese and for the explosion because it exploded near the Japanese owned railway, and they use this as an excuse, okay, the other word is pretext here, to actually launch a full-scale invasion of Manchuria. And Manchuria was renamed as Manchukuo under the symbolic leadership of the last emperor of China, but of course it is under the control, it's like an indirect rule here. Then you have the emperor of China, but then it is effectively under their military control. Now one thing about this, right, was that the invasion of Manchuria was actually done by the military themselves, and is it written down here? No, it's not. Okay, yeah, so let me just discuss something about this. First of all, the explosion. Think about it, similar to the right side fire. Do you think it was real or was it set up? Okay, so they could use this as an excuse to do whatever they want. And second of all, the military orchestrated this entire thing without informing the civilian government, bringing back to the point about rise of militarism in Japan. So the military seems to be out of control. The civilian government cannot control it anymore. And I must again emphasize this: the government still has ultimate control over the military. Like if we go to war, okay, the person who's overall in charge is not the highest ranked general in the military. It is actually Lee Hsien-loong, the prime minister. Similarly, and very unfortunately, in USA, if they go to war, the commander-in-chief or the person in charge is, at this moment, Donald Trump, which is very scary thoughts. Okay? So, Mukden incident, invasion of Manchuria. We carry on with that. Of course, China protested, asked them to get out of Manchuria. Other major powers refused to recognize Manchukuo. Okay, the last part is a Chinese word, means say country, so it becomes like a country by itself already. That's under the control of Japan now. Okay, so League of Nations, remember we are on actually the factor of the League of Nations. So the League of Nations, what did they do? They again condemned them and refused to recognize Manchukuo. But that's it. They did not do anything else. It was just like a slap on the arm, and there was nothing else. Not many suddenly the word slipped my mind. Not many embargoes, not many embargoes on them to stop selling them stuff, okay, and things like that. Okay, so what did Japan do is that they walked out of the League of Nations and they withdraw from it. Again, it's quite similar to what Hitler has done when they withdraw from the League of Nations for their own reasons. Okay, and that was in 1931. Okay, so not shortly, but 6 years later, 1937. So these are the dates that you need to know: 31 for Manchuria, 37 for China. Okay, there's another Marco Polo Bridge incident. So like I said, it was a Mukden incident for Manchuria. This one was a Marco Polo Bridge incident. So what happened was that there was a, okay, it's not in the slides here, but basically one soldier got lost, and then they went to, Japanese soldier got lost. They went to find him. They accused the Chinese side of taking him, and that again used as an excuse to start a full-scale invasion of China. There was a second Sino-Japanese war. So China being very weak at the time because they were very divided because of the political problems they were facing, they appealed to League of Nations for help, but the Western powers, they were not willing to get involved because at that period of time, if you remember in 37, they're not sure exactly what Hitler is doing yet. And if you remember, 37 would be Hitler's involvement in the Spanish Civil War. So at the time, they were still, sort of keeping an eye out for Hitler, and while at the same time focusing on what's going on in Europe rather than what's going on here in Asia. Now, it was only after the extent of Japanese violence in the Nanking massacre, that was made known internationally that they decided to try to help China. Now, you can go and Google more stuff about the Nanking massacre, Nanking, but I call it Nanking because it's a Chinese pronunciation. But it was a very horrific incident that happened, and the other term that we refer to other than the Nanjing massacre is actually called the rape of Nanjing, because it was really literally very that bad. Okay, when the entire city was yeah. Okay, so go and Google, find out more about Nanjing massacre if you're interested. But that's how. A little bit more about that. When the Japanese were attacking China, so everybody in the Chinese, right, the troops, they still have some troops they were defending, and they all fell back to Nanjing, and they tried to hold Nanjing as far as they could. And so because they held Nanjing, right, it's like they resist the Japanese as far as they could. When the Japanese finally break into Nanjing, they were very angry and commenced with the very horrific incidents that happened there. Okay, now, this factor is titled Calculated Risk to Attack Pearl Harbor, but it should be about the foreign policy changes. Okay, so let's move on to that. No, so because of the, okay, now let me try to link it with what we have been talking about so far, the second Sino-Japanese War. Okay, I want to link it to this, so ignore the first few sentences on the slide here. But basically, because of Japan's invasion of China, they actually imposed a trade embargo. Moving down here, okay. Oh, actually, they imposed a trade embargo after the. Okay, sorry. Let's go back here. Okay, so in response to the attack on China, USA, they placed restrictions on Japanese trade with USA. So that restriction actually caused them to, be lacking in materials, and they had to turn to Southeast Asia to start to invade Southeast Asia. And so that led to so as they attacked Southeast Asia for Japan, they started off occupying Vietnam. That's actually quite north of Southeast Asia, and they started going downwards. And so with the occupation of Vietnam, they banned the export of steel, scrap iron, and fuel to Japan, which actually affected them quite a bit, because they would then not be able to have any kind of raw materials that is required to continue their invasion in China. Okay, as you can see here in the next point, they were essential to the war effort in China. So they needed the oil-rich countries, which was Indonesia in Southeast Asia, to basically refuel and resupply everything that they need in the invasion of China. Okay, so this contributed to their decision to wage war in this Asia Pacific. So now, sorry, let me just, before I go back to the first part here, think about this. Okay, so if we ask about a start date, this is a challenge for this chapter, because the previous chapter, right, it doesn't talk about chapter 4, they talk about start date as in start of World War II in Europe. That would be 1st September 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland. In this case, when we talk about war in Asia Pacific covers China as well. So then, do we regard the start of World War II actually to have started in 37 when they entered China? I would say no, because Yeah, it's 1937. If you invade China, it's considered a Sino-Japanese war. It's not considered World War. Of course, the Europe, it can be considered European war, but that's besides the point. But we will regard that the start of war in Asia Pacific will be somewhere around when they start to invade Southeast Asia. Okay. Now, when we say Asia Pacific, it also includes the attack on Pearl Harbor. So we shall get to the Pearl Harbor parts. Now, how is USA involved in all this? We already know that they adopted isolationist policy because they're selfish. They don't want to do anything or to do anything with anybody. And they spoke of the need for the aggressor nations to be quarantined, but they speak of the need, but they never go and do anything about it. So at this point in time, they were just dealing with countries like Japan and Germany without actually doing anything. USA again have not officially entered the war. So, okay, before we get to the part about now, this is so fragmented. Okay, now because war has already broken out in 1939 in Europe, so the British and the French defenses, they were of course be busy defending their own country first. Okay, the British defending the British and the French defending the French instead of the areas such as Singapore, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And so since they were busy defending there, Southeast Asia was left defenseless, and this was a fantastic opportunity for them to attack Southeast Asia. French Indochina, okay, college history students, you should know what is Indochina. Elective history students, Indochina is basically Vietnam, not Indonesia and China, okay? It consists of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. So how now if you look at the map, okay, you need to look at the map for this. I don't have a copy down here. Now if you look at the map, the location of Pearl Harbor is in the middle between Japan and USA. So in order for them to successfully attack Southeast Asia without interference, even though USA officially is not in the war, the Japanese suspect that they might interfere, and so if they might interfere, they need to take them out, and you take them out, hit them at Pearl Harbor. So go watch the movie Pearl Harbor. Is a 3-hour happy love story, but the historical elements, some of it are still there. Okay. The final scene is got to do with chapter 7. We'll talk about that later. So they attacked Pearl Harbor. It was quite a success, and as a result of the successful attack on Pearl Harbor, okay, the USA, of course, declared war on Japan, and that involved their themselves into World War II. Okay, so sorry, let me just go back to this slide now. So in retaliation to the embargo, they had two choices. They can actually withdraw from China, therefore giving up, or they can attack USA because of the embargo, and also to allow them to invade Southeast Asia successfully. So the politicians, they don't really have a choice. They know that the military will be pushing. They would not consider a withdrawal option. So the other option is to retaliate and to attack Pearl Harbor. So they hope for victory by achieving a quick knockout blow. That means to say quickly attack the Pearl Harbor ships and the ships at Pearl Harbor, and hopefully that would actually allow them to knock out. So when I say knock out, it's really knock out USA, and they won't be able to interfere in Japan's invasion in Southeast Asia. Okay, and they were hoping that the Americans would negotiate a peace settlement, but of course they underestimate the pride of the Americans. So if you look at the timeline for the attack on Pearl Harbor, October 1941, they appointed the war minister. They have a war minister, Tojo, as the prime minister. And so Tojo basically went to the emperor. Emperor approved the plans, and they decided to start to attack Pearl Harbor. And before that, they also continued the rules of diplomatic negotiation. So if you watch the movie, you will realize this. They were having talks, and suddenly they withdraw from the talks. And after that, the following day or something like that, close proximity dates, they attacked Pearl Harbor in the attempt to achieve the knockout blow on their Pacific fleet. So there were a lot of ships there. So, but one of the good things that came out from this Pearl Harbor attack was that the aircraft carriers, they were actually out on patrol, so they weren't affected during the Pearl Harbor. I cannot remember if this is all aircraft carriers or some. Okay, and shortly after that, they declared war on Japan. All right, so this more or less wraps up the chapter. If there's anything that you don't understand, please ask me in class, and don't just watch the video and just stay here. Hopefully this does really help you in understanding this chapter, and to be better at organizing the entire chapter for better understanding.